Good evening. The idea that masculinity in its current form is what's expected of all American males binds us into a tight, rigid box. A box that is steeped and rooted in traditional thinking that we need to break free from. I grew up in an environment that promoted this myth of manhood. I heard things like boys don't cry, men don't feel pain. I spent the first half of my life answering questions with my fists. I proved my masculinity through criminal thinking and actions, narrowly escaping a life of recurring incarceration. As a young man, I had very limited ways in which to express my discontent and frustration with everyday life. Like most young men in my environment, my emotions were expressed through outbursts of violent tendencies and actions. It wasn't until I had sons of my own, started working with boys and men, caught in this vicious cycle, that I was able to recognize the dangers of toxic masculinity. The definition of masculinity is having qualities or appearance traditionally associated with men, especially strength and aggression. This is the standard at which we measure a man, aggression. The idea that being a man requires a demonstration of power in the form of brute force perpetuates a cycle of gender-based violence and rigid expectations of gender performance that is harmful to all genders. Recently, a teenage male shared with me that he was planning on joining the military. When I asked what had brought him to this choice, he told me that the only real man in his life was his uncle, and that his uncle told him the only way to become a man was to join the military and learn how to kill and defend himself. This young man's experience is not unique. The idea that physical power is the only true acceptable expression of masculinity is deeply embedded in our society and in our American culture. While working with men and boys, it became clear that these perpetuations of masculinity run deep. When asked what they define masculinity, they associate it with strength, power, aggression, intimidation. When the same group was asked about femininity, they cited scared, weak, defenseless, and timid. When asked what represented masculinity, the overwhelming majority of this group described muscle, conveying a hero worship culture, where the hero is bigger, stronger, and faster than the enemy. Our hero culture only presents us with pictures of masculinity in forms of power. Put any NFL, NBA star's photo up against any community leader or cultural advocate. One plays a sport. The others are helping change the world through critical thinking and actions. Who do we value more? This affects us profoundly. Our communities are filled with men living up to an antiquated expectation on how to handle life, overcome adversity, and cope with emotions through force, violence, or denial. Men are incarcerated at an alarming rate in this country, in part because of the aggressive and oftentimes violent traits commonly associated with masculinity and its rigid stance on almost everything it encounters. Keeping men in this overtly traditional concept we currently call masculinity stunts our emotional growth and keeps us in a cycle of short-fused responses and very limited reactions to a life filled with variables. In a very real sense, men are held to a standard that creates the impetus for the bully and rape cultures. This does not allow for the idea that problems can be solved by discussion, by joining together, by having a dialogue, by critical thinking or sharing real emotions. Masculinity, like most things in a culture, is negotiation. Our grandparents decided what it would look like to be a man, to be manly, to personify masculinity. The negotiation was brought about by those who controlled the status quo. The negotiation was made back then. And we still promote that negotiation now. And we don't have to. We don't have to keep fostering the ideas that prevent us from empathy, from sharing feelings, from not being afraid to ask for help. So let's begin a new negotiation of masculinity and what it means to be a man today. Let's break free from this myth. Let's renegotiate it. Let's not let it define who we are and who we want to be. Masculinity can be caring. It can be generous. It can be nurturing. It can be what we want it to be. It's up to us to break the myth and start a new negotiation that constructs masculinity as not just male, not only rigid, not only stoic, and not only aggressive. Men, let's be vulnerable. If you haven't already, start having the conversation. Let them know that they don't have to be bound by this myth. Challenge the idea with men around you. Encourage them to break free from this box. Let's help the generation and liberate the new ones so they can be free who they want to be. Thank you.